Professor, have you experienced racism in America?
That's a good question. That's a good question. It brings back, I don't even remember an incident that I can call racist. I don't. The significance of your question is this. It forces us to acknowledge that Africans, the way we are raised in Africa, in a place where everybody looks like us and so on, where the only white person we see is really like a professional, a doctor, a priest, a Peace Corps volunteer. We are not programmed to see or hear or smell or sense racism. We are not programmed.
Yeah.
So we can float around here with white people without sensing or realizing or recognizing
Wow,
the racism.
wow. This is actually my best part. We'll talk about racism. How do African immigrants perceive racism? Is it different from the way Black Americans perceive racism? What is the relationship that should exist between African immigrants and Black Americans? Don't miss this. This is the moment that I would say I've been waiting for, to speak with Professor Joseph Mbele. If you have not subscribed to this channel already, please do us that favor. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, share this video, leave your comments below, and reach us on the email. Reach us and we'll be able to take your story too. If you're watching us probably at the comfort of your home on a TV, you probably have not subscribed to this channel. So just go to your phone, try and subscribe, or search the subscribe button on your TV. Scroll up, scroll to the right, and you'll be able to see the subscribe button right there. So, the fact that you've been here 33 years, Africans come every day into Minnesota. Minnesotans get to experience different cultures. Africa has got 54 different countries. Some of these countries even have 200 different cultures. So all of these people come over here to Minnesota. Minnesota experience all these people. What role would you say you play in making this cultural integration smooth for Africans as well as for Minnesotans in terms of understanding each other?
One thing I try to do when I have the chance to meet Africans, because I live in a town where there's hardly any African. There may be 2-3 families. But when I come to Minneapolis here, that's where I interact with the Africans. So, and I do get opportunities to speak. To participate in events. And so I try to make sure to, again, highlight this fact that now we are in another country. There are certain things which don't apply here. We need to know, for example, that when Americans say, they're inviting us to dinner and the dinner is at 6 o'clock, it's very important to be there at 6 o'clock. It's not like Africa, where we don't come on time and it's okay. People just wait, They're not even aware that you are late. They know you are on the way. I need to tell the Africans, because we are very comfortable with our African ways. That level of comfort, that mindset, we need to think about it, change it.
That's true.
Here, you have to be on time. I have to tell the Africans, if you are not, it's disrespectful. You are a guest, and you are arriving 15-20 minutes later. You have kept the hostess waiting. That is disrespectful.
That's true.
Africans need to hear this. There are many dimensions of this. There are many manifestations of this. I have listened to, diversity conversations in this country. So, for example, people will say, we are here, and in our culture we don't eat this, or we don't do this, or we are Muslims, we don't eat this, we are Muslims, we don't do this. And that's okay to tell our hosts, those things. But at the same time, we also need to study the American way so we can make an effort
to meet halfway.
Yeah. So we can let's make an effort to study the American culture, because they also have a culture.
Beautiful.
We should not even say, oh, these people, they don't have culture, they don't have this. No, they have a valid culture.
Yeah.
They have values. We need to study those, respect them.
Yeah.
They also, the Americans, they also need to, when they are going to Africa, understand our ways, because it's easy to offend people.
Yeah.
If you don't follow their culture, you could easily offend them.
Oh, yes.
That's like the eye contact thing that we talked about.
Yes.
If a child looks the teacher in the eye, in Africa, that's offensive.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. Once you're in a foreign culture, you have put yourself in a situation where you need to learn and learn and learn.
Yeah.
And it could go down to simple things like conversation.
Yeah.
Say in America here, they have the notion that no means no. It's not that way in Africa.
Yeah.
It's not that way in Africa.
Yeah.
Especially, for example, when it has to do with the relations between men and women.
Yes.
Here, no means no. If you go beyond that, you could be, charged with serious violations.
Sure.
Yeah. And also, we Africans, there are many situations where we don't say yes and we don't speak directly. We beat about the bush. And it's a polite way of asking maybe or refusing. Yeah. Beating about the bush,
It's part of our culture.
It's part of our culture. And that's the sign of somebody who is intelligent.
Let them figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but Americans will say yes or no.
Or no.
And sometimes...
And they demand that from you also.
And that no could be offensive to an African.
Yes.
Look at these people, they are so rude, they are so disrespectful, they just say no. But that's their culture. Americans expect you to be direct, to say what you mean.
Say your mind, speak your mind.
Here, you are an African beating about the bush, evading the subject, and this is across Africa, by the way.
Yeah, that's
there are many situations where you cushion your statement with indirectness. Yeah.
No, you're correct.
Africans need to know these things, and Americans need to know when this African is beating about the bush, he's trying to be sensitive, respectful, not disrespectful.
Yes.
Trying to be respectful, So it's very subtle sometimes.
That's true.
It's not simple. It's not simple.
That's true.
Yeah.
Here also there is the culture of expressing yourself.
That's it.
Children, 5-year-old, are very comfortable telling an 80-year-old person
yes,
how they feel about something, what they want, what they don't want. I don't like you calling me like that.
and I address this issue in the context of the whole business of freedom of expression, freedom of thought. You have your right to express yourself. That's the American way. But I tell my students, in Africa, there are factors involved. If you are speaking with old people, or if you are in the presence of very old people, and you are a young person, first of all, you don't have the freedom of speech. They say things and you obey, period. The elders have spoken. That's what you do.
That's what you do.
You don't argue with them.
Yeah.
But here, they are taught you have the right to speak. And so you have little children arguing against parents. Can African children do that? Can a young person in Africa have an argument with an old person?
That would be an abomination.
These are the subtle things which are so exciting to explore.
Yeah.
And yet, as I say, they can easily cause offense. Between individuals, between communities, between countries. Look at the way the United States speaks to the world.
Yeah.
the way America speaks to the world, sometimes, they sound so blunt, and we can be offended. We can be offended. So my role has to extend beyond dealing with individuals or groups, like here in Minnesota, to actually counseling, governments. African government needs somebody to tell them. The United States said this to Tanzania or to Cameroon. They did not mean to disrespect you.
Yeah.
Okay. Our governments need to understand those things as well.
Yeah.
But also the Americans need to understand how to speak to our countries. The time when President Robert Mugabe was in, Zimbabwe, and the Westerners were saying he's a dictator, he's a dictator, and the U.S. President, George Bush, I think, he was saying, why don't African presidents do something about Mugabe? Why don't African presidents do something about Mugabe? And I told these people in Chicago that I was amused by that, because Mugabe was a very old man, the oldest president in Africa.
Yeah.
And then the other African presidents are very young people.
Professor, that point, I want us to just dig into it a bit. We have so many old presidents in the world, including the United States of America. Let me ask you, do you think the culture of respecting our leaders because of their age and letting things really go bad in African society, is that something that I think we need to change a little bit, how that respect, how far that respect should go?
I think that's where the dilemma occurs. That's a big dilemma for us Africans, because in our cultures, the respect for old people is so real, so thorough, we don't dare to criticize them. In fact, there are even proverbs which underline that point. In Swahili, the understanding, and it comes out even in Proverbs, the old person is never wrong.
What an old man can sit down seeing, a young man will climb on a tree and will never see.
You read the novel, Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart. For example, there are proverbs there. When a young person knows how to wash his hands, he can eat with the elders. Everywhere in Africa, there are these sayings which place the old people in a position where they're almost infallible. Almost infallible. Now, back to your question. If an African country has the misfortune to be under an old dictator, for example, it's not an easy proposition to kick them out. It's not an easy proposition.
That's correct.
Because there is at the back of our mind as African, the idea that I have to respect the elder. There is that problem with us. It doesn't exist in the USA. Here they curse President Biden.
Children.
They
go on CNN.
Go on placards.
They go on TV, curse Biden, curse Donald Trump. Curse them out, Children. 21-year-old, 18-year-old, 16-year-old, on TikTok, everywhere.
So in Africa, you and I, we are, intellectuals and everything. We might complain about, some African leader somewhere. But if you subject the whole thing to a vote, elections or a vote or something, you might end up, being surprised that the population will actually want that person.
Of course. It's happening everywhere.
And the intellectuals, the students are up in arms. But the people in the villages everywhere, they look at this person as, in Swahili we say, mzee. Mzee. And mzee is such a great honor
of
to
course.
Be a mzee.
Mzee. Two titles that I know in East Africa, to be able to be called a mzee and to be called a mwalimu.
Yes. So as we talk about culture, we need to go into these kinds of details. The dilemmas that we face. Okay, we are now products of the Western world. We have gone to colleges, universities. We've come to the USA. We've picked up these notions of democracy and this and the other thing. But then we confront cultural realities like that. How do you deal with the concept of mzee, for example?
Yeah.
And here you have the idea of, elections and, freedom of expression, and then here you have the concept of respecting mzee.
Yeah.
What do you do?
That's it.
What do you do?
Yeah. So you have to tread very carefully.
Exactly.
And again, it has to be about adaptation. When you are in Africa, understand one or two things about the African culture so you don't go offending everybody in the community. When you come over to the United States, understand one or two things about the culture here so you don't come here offending everybody. When you go to China, when you go to India, learn something about the culture. I tell you, if you can learn one or two things about another person's culture, you win their heart. Just one or two things about somebody's culture, you win their heart. I've traveled to quite a number of countries. And the very first thing I do, that specific place where I would stay, I must learn how to say good morning, how to say thank you in their language. And say just those words. You capture their heart.
In fact, the students, the American students that I advise, before they go to Africa, after I talk about so many things, I end up saying, if there is only one thing I need to tell you, you need to learn, is how to respect the elders. You go to a village in Cameroon and you don't know much about the culture and you are afraid of doing the wrong thing. Just learn how to respect the old people, how to greet them properly. Because if the old people endorse you, if the old people accept you as well behaved, then that word will spread through the village.
That's true.
And everybody will like you because you respect their grandma. You respect their grandpa. You can go around, because the fact that you respected their grandma or you are respectful to the elders in that village is a big passport to you.
That's it.
I tell the Americans this, without any apologies. It's a big passport.
That is the impact, the importance of cultural exchange to integration. When you are able to see another person's culture, not from a judgmental point of view, but from an exchange point of view, it makes integration very smooth. I really believe so, Professor. And we're not talking about just languages. We're not talking about just behaviors. Food. I see a lot of white people now eat fufu and ero, a delicacy from Cameroon. I see a lot of white people talk about nyamachoma and ugali, and they eat these things. This is what it takes for us to smoothly integrate with each other here in Minnesota.
And with food, again, because I'm a cultural kind of person, I like to talk about the rituals that go with food. For example, if you are offered food, you don't say no. You don't refuse food. I tell Americans, refusing food is not appropriate. You don't tell Africans, oh, I just had lunch, thank you. I just had lunch. No. You will walk from one village to another. They will cook
some food
for you. Yes. They don't even ask you whether you need food.
They don't ask you whether you need food in Africa. That is considered being stingy. Yes, the accent.
So when so I tell the Americans that what they need is to learn to hear the different accents. But people should have the right to speak naturally. Yes. We in Africa are comfortable with the various accents that people bring. We don't want them, we don't ask them to speak like a Cameroonian before they can teach us. No. And so when you talk about accent, the way they talk about it here, first, they're misconstruing the meaning of accent. An accent is an individual's way of speaking. And every individual has an accent.
And it doesn't say whether it's a bad one or a good one. It's just an individual's way of speaking.
You cannot say a word or speak a sentence without an accent. It's not possible. Accent is inevitable as part of the way you speak. Everybody has an accent.
And simple things like this, we make them such mountains.
Exactly.
And use it as a means of dividing people. Making others superior, making others inferior.
And it's all based on ignorance.
It's ignorance. A lot of things, by the way, is based on ignorance.
Ignorance.
Racism is ignorance. This is one of those things. Ignorance. Professor, have you experienced racism in America?
That's a good question. It brings back, I don't even remember an incident that I can call racist. I don't. I don't know whether it's because I interact only with the academics, students, intellectuals. I've not worked in a factory in this country. I've not worked on a construction site. Maybe that's why. Maybe I'm in the classroom, I'm, in academic conferences, and we are dealing with theories and research and things like that. I don't know if that's the reason. However, the significance of your question is this. It forces us to acknowledge that Africans, the way we are raised in Africa, in a place where everybody looks like us and so on, where the only white person we see is really like a professional, a doctor, a priest, a Peace Corps volunteer. We are not programmed to see or hear or smell or sense racism. We are not programmed. So we can float around here with white people without sensing or realizing or recognizing the racism. We are not programmed that way. African Americans, on the other hand, Black Americans, they come from a different history. All the way from slavery, which was very dangerous, very terrible, very horrible. They developed these sensitivities. For survival, of course, they needed to be able to detect this. We don't have that same capacity as Africans. And so Africans, we can be playing around with white people here, and African Americans look at us like we are dumb.
You don't play with a white man like that.
Because they wonder why we are so ignorant, why we are so unaware. They accuse us of being naive.
And sellouts.
But the poor African has not had the sensibilities. The history is different. The programming of the feelings, the minds, what we see, what we hear, we don't interpret it the way they do.
That's powerful. I've never thought of it that way.
It's a very profound thing that you're asking. And so if you ask an African whether they experience racism, they might not even know what racism looks like. However, if you have an African here who has a conflict with a white person, and they start cursing each other, the black person, the African person, we will say that person is evil. We can say that. My supervisor is a very bad man. We are not going to say he's a racist. We'll just say he's a terrible man. He's a bad man. He's horrible. He's rude. We'll use those terms. We are not going to say automatically he's racist. We have not acquired those concepts where we are coming from. We can experience the same thing here. Look here, for example, when I was in graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin, we would go to a party with other Africans. At night, we have our car, Cameroonians, Tanzanians, South Africans. we have been drinking and everything. We are stopped by the police on the highway in Madison. We never translated this as racist. You know, we would interact with the police, you know, they would check the licenses and so on. We go home. For 6 years, it never registered to us. It never registered in us that this was racism. It was just...
Is it racism? I ask you.
I don't know.
Because even in Africa, you will be stopped.
Yeah.
by police.
Because, but Africans will say, oh yeah, that police stopped us. But they're not going to say it was
they stopped us because we are black.
No.
But racism exists, Professor.
It does exist.
How?
But we are not always aware of it.
No, how does it exist? Because, okay, black Americans have, you've said it very correctly, they have a history which makes them recognize racism.
And we don't have that history.
Preferential treatment, Professor. Preferential treatment. The way I'm treated, the way the waiter who is white gives water to a black man, the way the waiter who is white gives water to a white man.
That's what I'm saying.
The way they let me, even at the airport, Professor, they easily let the white man in.
Now, the poor African who is just coming here from the village, he may see such a thing. His interpretation, he's not going to use the word racism. He's saying that's a bad person.
Favoritism.
They kept me waiting. Favoritism. The African from the village will say, I encountered blatant favoritism.
And this happens even in African. We perpetrate this more, Professor.
Yeah.
It's difficult for me to go to Tanzania as an African than for an American to go to Tanzania.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah.
It's more difficult for an African to go into another African country than for a white man to go into another African country.
That's the thing. So what I'm saying is, the problem is there. How we name it is different. The problem is there. We all experience it. But how do we name it? What do we call it? It's just a matter of vocabulary and concepts.
Yeah.
That is the problem. It doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. How we understand it, how we name it.
How we perceive it.
How we name it.
I have been stopped by white cops in Minnesota here like 4 times. I've never received a ticket though. It's like they know who is from Africa by the way you behave, by the way you perceive, by the way you carry out the conversation.
Yeah. I've been stopped many times also, because 33 years, maybe 13 times. But each time it was my fault. Speeding. Mostly speeding. I could tell them, I could swear that I was speeding. In fact, 2 days ago I was stopped for speeding. It was an area where it was 55, I was going at 70. Yeah. I recognized I'd been speeding and I slowed down and the cops were right ahead of us.
But they have already captured?
And so they turned around and they did the lights and I stopped. I just told them, yes, I understand why you're stopping me. I went over 70. I said, yeah. It was a woman. She said, yeah, you were going at 72. And she let me go. She said, thanks for being so honest. Yeah. I'm not going to give you a ticket.
Simple conversations like that.
Yeah. So the big problem is this. We will encounter the same problem, but how do we interpret it?
We encounter the same situations, Professor. I don't want to call it problems. If I get stopped by a police, even in Africa, when a police stops you, the first thing that you have to understand is that the police has the right to stop you. Now, what? Yeah, this is true. When the police stops you, how you start perceiving that this is an unjust stoppage or this is not, it's the questions that come after. We do have silly questions coming from cops also. And when those questions start coming, I always say you can control how you react to situations. You can't control how the other person reacts to situations. You can be insulted like by a small child, How you react will make that situation worse. but you can't control how the other person reacts. A lot of these young people join the police force. Maybe they are not as educated. They join the police force for various different reasons, but one of the things is to maintain law and order. So when the police stops you, it's not for me to start saying they are wrong to stop me. It's not for me to start judging that I am right and they are wrong. No, when the police stops you, they could be stopping you for your good. Sometimes, just look at it that way. When the police stops me, the first thing that comes to mind is there must be a reason why he stops me. So when he comes on board and we are having a conversation, that is when we'll see if this person is really doing his job or her job, or if they are just trying to push their title and their authority around.
And that's one thing. You may correct me there, and our listeners may correct me. They may disagree. That's one thing that differentiates us Africans from Americans. I'm using the word Americans.
You mean Black Americans?
All of them.
Okay.
Because they are so focused on race and all the stereotypes around race. But we Africans, when we see a white person, we don't prejudge them. We interact with them. We greet them. If they don't respond, that's when we begin to judge how they behave, So we give them the opportunity to show who they are before we can say, that's a bad one. That's a bad person. We don't just look at these two whites and say, oh, these are terrible whites.
These are racist people.
Whites. No, we don't. Americans, again, generalizing, they see black person, they sense it might be dangerous, oh yeah, a black person, it must be dangerous. They have that built into them, Black Americans, they see a white person, they already sense that, we don't. We wait to interact. That's why we are not afraid of people.
That's true.
We talk, we tease them, we joke. We take the risk of...
You're very right. That's true. We wait for the interaction.
And then we make the judgment.
Let the interaction be the source of
our judgment. So you have the opportunity to show who you are. That's what I give Americans. That's advice I give Americans. You are going to Cameroon, you will see black people everywhere. Don't think they are the black people of the USA. Those Cameroonians, they are Tikar, they are Bamileke, they are this. They are not black Americans. You will have the opportunity to show what kind of person you are. Go to the bar, buy them beer, have fun with them. They will say, this is a wonderful guy. But if you stay at home and don't greet anybody, you are giving yourself that name, that bad name, yourself.
But again,
I think, as I said, maybe you would disagree with me, but I was saying this is something that distinguishes us Africans from Americans. We don't prejudge you simply because we see you are black or simply because we see you are white. We don't
I like the way you put it, that we Africans, and by that you mean African immigrants from Americans when we are here. So the black is not something you can say. It's when you say black, you automatically mean Africa. No, we have white people who are Africans.
Yeah, that's true.
And there is this whole thing, and like you said, ignorance is what propagates things like racism. We only have the human race. Things like racism, accent, and cultural differences, small, simple things that make us separate, make a huge wedge. You are at this extreme, I'm at this extreme. We fail to see the commonalities, the things that unite us as humans. You have two nostrils. You eat. When you feel hungry, you feel hungry. You get weak. When you get sick, when COVID came, it affected both black, white. These are the things that make us human. It's not about how my skin looks. It's not about what I eat. It's not about how I speak. It's not about my accent. It's not about, Final conclusion. What message do you have to our African brothers who have come from Africa all the way here in the United States? And they see themselves as superior to Black Americans. And what is your message to Black Americans? Because there is that subtle hate that exists between Black Americans and African immigrants. Some are thinking, oh, you are less because you come from this slavery history. Some are thinking, oh, and some of them even come here and lie to people that they are royalties, they are princes, they are princes from their small villages, and they make people feel like Africa is one small village where everybody knows the prince. Remember, I'll tell you a small story, Professor. When I first came to the United States, I stopped in Georgia. And the factory, I worked in a factory. The factory where I was working, there was a guy there who had been telling people how he's the prince. He's the prince of the village. He's the prince of the kingdom. So, making them feel that, oh, the whole of Africa is one kingdom. You know? And then they asked me, oh, that's your prince. That's your prince right there. Your prince works here too. I said, which prince are you talking about? So I said, who is the guy? They called the guy. And I asked him, where are you from? You know? And they were asking, so people were just standing. Black Americans were standing and watching to see how I will interact with him. So I asked him his precise place where he's coming from. We had a normal conversation. I said, that's not my prince. He's from one country in Africa. I've never even been in that country. And I'm from another country in Africa. Africa is a vast...
It is,
So, but there's a subtle... problem. There's a subtle hate that exists between Black Americans and Africans. Professor.
I think that's a very unfortunate situation, and it's based on ignorance again. There's a lot of ignorance on the part of Africans who come here or whether they're in the continent. Ignorance of first their own history and of the history of Black Americans.
Yes.
There is equally a lot of ignorance among African Americans of their own history, which includes their history when they were in Africa and their history over here. And ignorance of the history of Africans, the Africa they left behind. Ignorance. So you find these ones, accusing Africans, oh, you sold us. That's ignorance of history. There were only a few African, people who engaged in the slave trade. The majority were themselves, not involved, or they were victims. Because there was slavery in Africa itself.
That's true.
So that's a lot of ignorance. They don't just jump at anybody who comes from Africa and say, you sold me. No. It's not that way. So studying the history, who exactly participated in the slave trade in Africa and how much a lot of the Africans were themselves victims right there in Africa. These people need to know that. The Africans need to know that. Also, the Africans over there were not on vacation all those centuries. They suffered under colonialism.
Yes!
It was horrible. These people suffered from slavery. It was horrible in the plantations and so on and so on. Brutality of the slave master. There was brutality of German rule. So the Africans that were left behind, they were not on vacation. They underwent colonialism, which was a brutal experience. A lot of bloodshed. German rule in Cameroon, in my country, in Togo, massacres of our people. Terrible warfare, in Mau Mau, in Algeria, in South Africa, the Zulu Wars.
The Zulu, Shaka, the Zulu Kingdom.
There are mass graves in my country. The Germans hanged a lot of our people. In Namibia, the Herero. There's genocide. You talk about genocide in Germany, the Holocaust. They started it in Namibia.
Africa,
After Namibia is when they went on practice it in Germany. So African Americans need to know the Africans that were left behind, they also fought colonial rule They fought very hard. Bloodshed.
And a lot of them died in it.
Okay, here, when the Africans now come here, they also need to know the history of these people. They also suffered and they fought through civil rights, through all these things, and they are still fighting. They are still victimized. So there should be respect. There should be mutual respect of each other's history, mutual understanding of each other's history, mutual respect of each other's struggle. The struggles of African Americans has made it possible for the African to come today as an immigrant, to go to school, get a job here. You know, the struggle of these people has to be respected. They've made it possible. But the struggle of the Africans has made it possible now for African Americans to go to Ghana and Senegal and Gambia and South Africa. The brutality of apartheid in South Africa and the resistance. Now there are thousands of African Americans going to settle in Africa. They see opportunities there. But those opportunities did not drop from the sky.
They didn't.
So to answer your question, African Americans need education. Africans need education. It will foster the mutual respect that we need.
And I think that is what will cement that bond.
Yeah.
You want to call yourself an African American, do some history. You want to call yourself an African who has moved to the United States and is trying to underlook Black Americans because of the history of slavery and slave trade, do some history yourself. And I'll tell you, Professor, you know this. Africans are not free from this colonial pain and tragedy.
We're still under colonial.
We are still under neocolonialism now, where I said in one of my clips on, I think, TikTok, the new slave masters that Africans now have are their own people themselves.
Precisely.
Because they are the ones who are there now, like the gatekeepers, to send the wealth to countries that have absolutely nothing to do with
They are like the plantation overseers in this country during slavery.
Yes.
You know, the colonizer, the slave owner used blacks to control other blacks.
Yeah.
They give them the whip and the horse or whatever it is. Yeah. They were brutalizing the fellow slaves.
That's true.
And that's what we have. Many of the leaders in Africa are modern day, you know, overseers in the plantations. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
What are the future? What does the future hold for us African immigrants in Minnesota?
I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic that with the education, you know, the enlightenment that comes from education, you know, people get to understand one another more. And besides, the world is a global village. Globalization is real.
Yeah.
This country is experiencing a lot of immigrants and so on, but then Africa is not left alone either.
Yeah.
There are people going into Africa as well, from China, from Europe, from the Americas. So every place is going to be flooded by, you know, people from other places. We will have to learn to live well together. There is no choice. No place is going to be untouched. We will have to learn. If we don't, we are digging our own grave.
There is only one choice. We must live together.
We must live together.
So whether you learn to live together, or you don't learn to live together, you must live together. And if you learn to live together, life becomes easier. You refuse to learn to live together,
pay the price.
You pay the price. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We could not do without this conversation. Daktari, asante sana.
Thank you very much.
Umefanya vizuri. This is a whole free education, by the way. Free education.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. For
asante sana, Daktari. Remember, learn to adapt. If you come here from Africa, do not lose your identity. If you leave the United States or you leave China, Europe, wherever, you're going to Africa, do not lose your identity, but learn to adapt to the culture in which you are getting into. It's a legacy that Professor is leaving behind. And we must be able, as young Africans, to take up that legacy of educating communities about the African culture. And we must take up that legacy of continuing to respect the cultures that we meet as Africans without losing our identity. Have you subscribed? Have you liked? Share the video now and leave your comments below, because we are Afri-Sultans and here is your channel. Dr. Asante Sana.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.